Hello and welcome to Kloeker's Education Foundation, providing quality content for amazing teachers and students. If you're joining us from a previous lesson or previous video, welcome back. And if this is your first time, we're glad you're here. This is our World History series, and this lesson is on the Mongols. Before we get started, don't forget you can check out the link in the description below for a set of free guided notes to go along with this lesson. While you're there, go ahead and like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't have to at the end. Thank you. So let's get started. We will see the Mongols arise out of Central Asia. Now, because of the environment, the open steppe, they're going to adapt the horse to be a useful tool in their society. They're going to begin raiding and trading with different societies and civilizations along the open plain, ultimately being unified under one ruler, Genghis Khan. The Mongols will create the largest land-based empire in the world across Eurasia, from modern-day China all the way into Eastern Asia and down into Southwest Asia. This large land-based empire is going to facilitate open trade, which will help the spread of products, culture, technology, and disease such as the Black Death or bubonic plague. Now, despite the fact that the Mongol Empire will be divided into different khanates, which will all pay homage to their emperor, it is going to be a relatively stable empire and thus entering an era known as Pax Mongolica, or the Peace of the Mongols, allowing trade to continue on the Silk Road. The Mongols and this large land-based empire are going to interact with different civilizations, and they're going to interact with societies different based off of culture and, of course, geography, where they are at. For example, in 1215, the Mongols will conquer Beijing. This is putting China under foreign rule for the first time. Now, they'll establish their own khanate over China. This is referred to as the Yuan Dynasty and the Kublai Khan. They're going to keep several of the important aspects of Chinese culture and structure, such as the political and economic systems, but they're going to end the civil service exams that were so instrumental to the rise of efficient dynasties. This is mostly because the Mongols are going to install people who are ethnically Mongol into those positions of power. Now, unlike different regions of the world, within China, the Mongols are going to segregate themselves from the Chinese people. They're going to view the Chinese people as inferior to themselves and thus separate themselves, with the Mongols being the ruling class and the Chinese being the lower working class. Northern China will be conquered by 1234 by Genghis Khan's son, Ogadai, and we will see the establishment of the Yuan Dynasty. Now, Ogadai is going to pass away in 1241, and his nephew, Kublai Khan, will end up taking over and completing the capture of China, unifying China for the first time in 300 years, but it is also one of the first times that China is conquered by a foreign power. Now, the Mongols are going to control not just China, they're also going to have the separate Mongol khanates going westwards towards Europe, facilitating trade. And this is when we see the famous travels of Marco Polo, who's going to visit and serve on the Kublai Khan's court for several years. He'll write a book about this and come back. And of course, this has been widely publicized, and people were very skeptical of the book in Europe when he returned. Now, we'll have a whole lesson up next on China and the Mongols, so stay tuned for that. When the Mongols arrive in Southwest Asia, they're going to destroy much of the heartlands of the Middle East, especially around Baghdad, destroying the Muslim caliphates. They'll try expanding into Egypt, but ultimately will be stopped by the Mamluks, thus bringing about an emergence of power in Egypt, because it's one of the few places that were successfully able to stop the Mongol expansion. And we'll see them absolutely destroy the Seljuk Turks, who are ruling Anatolia or Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, and thus creating a power vacuum within the Middle East. Just to put that in perspective, when Hulagu, the grandson of Genghis Khan, captures the city of Baghdad, he systematically executes over 10,000 people within the city. Now, this is not including the soldiers that died in defense. Now, unlike in East Asia and China, where we see there's a separation between the Mongols and the other cultures, in Southwest Asia, we see that the Mongols are going to convert to Islam, and there's going to be a blend of the Muslim and Mongol cultures, especially within Persia. Now, unfortunately, because there is still some of the ethnic differences, and the Mongols were very preferential to putting their own ethnic people in power, there's poor planning, poor administration. There's going to be a power vacuum created once the Mongol dynasties are starting to collapse, and the fall of the Mongols in Southwest Asia will ultimately lead to the rise of the Ottoman Turk, who are going to be using gunpowder, but also several of the Mongol techniques used in warfare. And of course, we would have to talk about how the Russians made heroic stands, but ultimately fell to the Mongol expansions as the Mongols made it all the way to Europe and even into some of the modern day nation states such as Ukraine. Russia will be turned into a tribute state. They'll expand the practice of serfdom. And I want to clarify what serfdom looks like in this era as opposed to what slavery looked like, because the two are fairly similar. In slavery, an individual was property of another, and they were subject to the authority and ownership of another individual. And if that owner traveled, they could take the slaves with them, and the slaves would be forced to work. We're fairly familiar with how that system worked. Serfdom is very similar, except that the individuals are not viewed as property to another individual, but rather to a title or position. They are subject to the land. The serfs don't get to leave. And so if a Mongol horde came through and swept through a city and took the city, they would force people into serfdom. They would keep serfs who are already in serfdom. And so the serf would no longer be serving the Russian owner of the land. They would be serving the Mongol owner of the land. And whoever replaced the Mongol, that serf would be in service to them until we see the abolition of serfdom in 1861. We'll see Mongol culture diffuse throughout Eastern Europe, and we'll see the fall of Kiev famously in 1240 AD. The Mongols have dominated Russia, but Russian religion and culture is still allowed to continue as long as the high tribute is paid to the Mongol Khans. Now, because these tribute amounts are so high, we see the expansion of serfdom in places not directly ruled by the Mongols. Now, this is, of course, making the Russian people very bitter at the Mongols and the resentment to their authority. We see that Russia is so far east, it's isolated from Western Europe, so ideas, technology, inventions are not going east into Russia. And we begin to see the Russian rebellion against Mongol authority, especially in the state of Muscovy and the city of Moscow emerging as a major city in that role. Ultimately, in 1480, Ivan III, or Ivan the Great, is going to lead an army to fight the Mongols. He's going to stop paying tribute to the Mongols, and the Mongols will arrive at the Ugra River. Historians are going to argue and disagree about the standoff that happens at the Ugra River, whether it was bloodless or whether there was some skirmishes. Some historians will argue that the Mongols, upon arriving and realizing that there was going to be a major loss of life, decided to retreat. Others will say that the Mongols attempt to cross the river and the Russians rain down fire with arrows, artillery, and cannons, destroying the Mongol forces and the ice on the river, causing more to sink underneath and lose their lives. Historians will argue about the events of the standoff. However, historians agree about the effects of it. The throwing off of the Mongol-Tartarian yoke and the beginning of Russian unity. Life under the Mongols was fairly peaceful as long as the tributes were paid. You were generally allowed to practice your religion as long as you prayed for the health of the Khan and paid your taxes. Now, one region that falls under Mongol rule that we didn't get to talk a whole lot about is India. Now, India will stay protected from the Mongols up into the late 14th century because of the mountain ranges, the Himalayas, the Hindu Kush that are going to separate the northern parts of India from China, but ultimately the Mongols will flank through as they conquer Persia. This is the final threat that nomadic invasions are going to have towards settled civilizations. That wraps up our lesson, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for watching. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Check us out on Teachers Pay Teachers, YouTube, Rumble, and the Kloeker Education Foundation website. We have a ton of resources there that you might find helpful, like, and enjoy as well. To see what's new and what's next in our series, click here as we break down China, the Mongols, the Reformation, the Renaissance, and the Age of Exploration. Click down below for something you might like, and here to the right to subscribe to our channel. All this and more is just a click away. I'll see you there.